Hi, my name is Dane Philipsen, and I teach oboe here at the Interlochen Center for the Arts, both at the Interlochen Arts Academy and at the summer Interlochen Arts camps. Um, I really look forward to my trips down to the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, catching up with my great friend Carlos Cantu, and all of the wonderful music family at the university. And so I hope at some point to see you there, and I hope at some point you'll be able to come and visit me in Interlaken as well. As always, I'll just mention now, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. My email address is available to you. You can just search for me, Dane.Philipsen, Dane.Philipsen, at interlochen.org. I'm always happy to hear from you. And if you've got a question, I would love to hear from you, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. But without any further ado, let's get down to these etudes. Let's talk first about the page 9 All-State, Texas All-State etude. This is a D minor fast etude by Fairling, presented here in the selected studies by Jaime Voxman. I have always enjoyed playing this etude, and I hope you can enjoy it too. I think that the assertive and brooding nature of the music can be perhaps a little intimidating at first, but here's an etude where a little bit of analysis will really go a long way to helping you unlock the answers in terms of how to get this to sound the way you want it to sound and make it flashy and exciting to listen to. What do I mean about analysis? Well, let's look at measures 1 through 3. This is really just a D minor arpeggio with some fancy little lower neighbor tones thrown in there as well. Measures 5 through 7, again, an A major arpeggio, the dominant arpeggio. So as you work on this, being aware that you have some larger patterns that then just some smaller sequential patterns are built on will really help you to get the most out of that. Now, the way that we group these patterns together can be super helpful in getting that forward energy and drive that we really want to get out of this. So I just want to point out that this is a case where grouping things together by beats doesn't really make a lot of sense. I'm going to start in measure 2, actually, just to avoid dealing with the tie in the first measure for right now, just to talk about this grouping. If I group this together by beat, that doesn't make so much sense. So really, these accents are kind of like a home base that we want to get to. So every time we get to an accent, we've already arrived there. So use the next notes to take us to the next accent. And that will really help us to propel forward as you speed that up. You'll be able to hear more when I play the etude for you in just a little bit. So always those 3/16 notes are propelling you forward. Now, I mentioned that analysis is going to help you a lot on this one. I would encourage you to make a list of all of the nuts and bolts pieces, the scales and arpeggios that Fairling took, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, pieced it all together to make this etude. You're going to see a lot of D minor, both D minor scale and D minor arpeggio. Makes a lot of sense. It's in D minor. We're also going to see a lot of A major, especially the A major arpeggio, which is the dominant chord in D minor. The chromatic scale factors into this a whole lot. We can see these big descending and sometimes ascending passages of chromatic lines. So I would pick out your chromatic scale and spend some extra time working on that technically, just to be better prepared for this etude. If you go through and find all of those patterns, the scales and the arpeggios, practice those on their own, get really comfortable with those. Then when you start to put the pieces together, those puzzle pieces will really start to just interlock for you. Build those elements and it'll come together. Then, because you will have analyzed it and you'll have noticed some things, you can really focus on how things like different key areas start to change the color. So I want you to notice that in measure 1, we get kind of the main motive that we associate driving all the way through this etude. And at measure 13, we get that same motive again, but instead of starting on a low D, we're starting on a low F. And we've made it to the relative major key. We're in F major. So even though it's the same motive, I want to bring out a totally different color. I think this F major needs to be both sort of joyous, but also a little bit naive, where the D minor is so dark and angry and brooding and has all of that angst. When we get to F major, we need something totally different. If you can show the audition committee listening to you that not only you can do great technique and great dynamics and articulation that's really nice and clean and good, but you can also show the difference between D minor and F major, where it's the same motive, I think that will really set you apart. And also, it just really sounds cool and it sounds great. And I think you'll really enjoy that. Hopefully, I'll be able to bring that out when I play this for you in a little bit. So bring out those changes in keys and color. Ah, yes. One more place that I really want you to pay attention to that. That is going to be in measure 24. This is at the very end, and we hear that low D come back here fortissimo. So give it extra gusto, extra brooding, extra darkness. But wait, when we get to the third beat of that measure, we get an F sharp instead of an F natural. It's in major here. We get this surprise burst of brightness in F major. Make sure you bring that F sharp out and show that you know how it changes the key. And then in the very next measure, measure 25, when we get to the beat 3 in that measure and we get the B flat, that confirms that we're back in D minor. So bring that darkness, bring that brooding. It's almost darker and harder to hear now after we've had that ray of sunshine with the F sharp. Here we get B flat, bring that darkness back. We launch into this diminished 7th chord in measure 26, and then it's just D minor all the way to the end. A dominant, really strong close on the minor tonic. Bring it home, driving all the way to the end. I hope you enjoy this one. Now, for the page 32 Heinz etude in F sharp minor, you've got a really nice opportunity to show a contrast with the other two faster, quicker, more technical etudes. So you're going to, of course, this goes without saying, you're going to want to show some more lyrical side to your playing. This is an F sharp minor relative of A major, so 3 sharps. Maybe not something that we see in band music all the time, but not a particularly challenging or off-putting key for the oboe. Falls pretty well under the fingers, except when we shift into F sharp minor, remember that that makes our leading tone accidental put in there an E sharp. E sharp can be a little bit problematic just because we usually think of that fingering as belonging to the note F. So don't forget then also that everything that applies in terms of alternate fingerings to F, forked Fs, left Fs, regular Fs, right hand Fs, things like that, that also applies to E sharps. So there are going to be times in here where you're going to need not just an E sharp, but an alternate E sharp. Now, forked Fs tend to be a little bit wonky on many oboes pitch-wise. A lot of times they're kind of flat and tubby or a little bit dull or they stick out. And in this case, in this key, the E sharp is the leading tone. So I really do care about the quality and the pitch and the direction and my flexibility with that note because I want it to really belong as a leading tone to the F sharp. So you will probably notice that when I play this, most of the time that I would maybe by finger logic be needing a forked E sharp because there's also a G sharp nearby, I'm actually going to do something where I might start on like a left E sharp, switch to a right E sharp so that I can then take the G sharp key or vice versa. And so I might do some switching like that so that I can use really the best sounding E sharp fingering, but not have to do any sliding or anything like that in this case. The tempo is slow enough that I think there's enough time that if you practice it, you can get some of those switches to work. Now this is in 6/8. This is another thing that can be a little bit tricky for us to get used to, but this is 6/8 in 6, marked at the top of the page as such. I think the Allstate suggestion said something about doubling times or something like that, and there was a lot of math involved. But if we just think about the 8th note as being what gets the beat here, and that there are 6 8th note beats in every measure, then the 16th note is half a beat. The 32nd note, which we do get a few of those, gets a quarter of a beat. So that can be really helpful to know that you can really just think of this as 6 and that the 8th note is going to get the beat. Even though we're going to be thinking maybe a whole bunch of beats in a measure, our goal is still to create really long and flowing lines. So really try to be aware about how the notes group together into motives or ideas. You'll be able to find the patterns and bring those out, paying attention to the pickup notes and where they lead, but also be really, really particular with the ending notes, the notes that end groups or that end phrases. Make sure to play them with a beautiful end and let that kind of release so that we don't end up actually with long flowing lines that are too long and turn into a run-on sentence. So I think it's really important in something that's slow with long flowing lines to make sure that you know ahead of time where you're going to end your phrases so that your listener has something to sort of follow along with and doesn't get carried away in long run-on sentences like probably the way I'm talking right now. Now, something else that I want you to think about in this one are all of the big intervals, especially the intervals that start low and go high, because those are really exciting for a listener and they're a lot of fun to play on the oboe. But this etude uses a lot of very large intervals. So technically speaking, remember to adjust your embouchure and your air to compensate for these large changes in range. Remember to roll in just a little bit to help you get up into some of the extreme higher ranges. And then here's the one that we all usually forget a little bit more often, to really roll back out. Really open the space inside your embouchure, behind your embouchure in the oral cavity, to make sure that there's enough space to really center the low notes and play those right in the center of the tone without chipping anything there. For the upward intervals, anytime you're getting ready, gosh, I think even an upward fourth, but certainly some of these huge, like over an octave intervals, the high note is going to have a lot of energy. So to create that long line, we have to make sure that there's enough energy in the low note that precedes the high note so that it sounds kind of connected. So make sure that you build that energy and then float off of the energy when you go up so that we get these nice, smooth connected lines. I hope maybe I'll be able to demonstrate that for you when I record the etude for you to hear. Check me. I guess the last real piece of advice I have for you here is this etude is long, but you probably already knew that. But don't kid yourself. Really be aware this etude alone is longer than the other two etudes put together. So you're going to need to have a really good plan, and you're going to need to train yourself to have the endurance, and not just the physical endurance, embouchure, air, and all of that. That can be taxing, but also to have the mental endurance to really make it from the beginning to the end. Have a good breathing plan that gives yourself plenty of time to breathe out as well as time to breathe in, to keep your blood oxygenated, your brain healthy and thinking and with you. And a great way to be able to breathe when and how you need to. Remember, it again comes down to releasing the note before the breath really, really well. Just like we talked about releasing notes at the ends of phrases so they don't run on and on and on. If we clip the end of the note, or we're already like gasping for air before we've really ended the phrase or ended the note group, we draw a lot of attention to the breath. But if we end that beautifully, then take the time to breathe and then enter beautifully, that gives us the best opportunity to really kind of blend our breathing in with everything else. Hey, listen to your friends who play flute, maybe even your friends who play trumpet, other instruments that end up breathing a whole lot more than oboe players. They have to figure this out because they're breathing a whole lot more than we do. And so this is a time where we can really rely on them to get some good ideas. These beautiful releases are really important. I think it's also okay to use some rubato in here, a little bit of slowing down, but also some speeding up in places. I hope I'll be able to demonstrate that for you as well. I would not play this etude completely metronomically. I think it's very romantic in nature, and so it is appropriate to maybe have some moments that push ahead, but it needs to happen in a well thought out way that corresponds to increasing energy and increasing excitement. That will also, in terms of breathing and a breathing plan, allow you to slow down and taper some of the ends of the larger sections, which can give you a really musical way to have just a little bit more time to really breathe, reset physically, and come back in. Whatever you do for your breathing plan, write it in. Use the same plan every time. If your plan isn't working, make some modifications, but you want to practice your breathing plan just as much as you practice the notes and rhythms, so that when you get to the performance, you get to your lesson, you get to your audition, you know exactly what you're going to do. Don't leave your breathing up to chance. Now I'd like to give you a few ideas about how to prepare the page 44 etude. This is the D flat major etude by Fairling, also available in the Fairling 48 Famous Studies collection, and available in several different editions with some differing editorial markings here and there. But a good idea for you to stick to the edition here in the selected studies collected by Jaime Voxman. So the first thing right there, D flat major, this is not a key that we play oboe music in on a regular basis. So when you're preparing this etude, whether it's just for a lesson or for your own study or for an all-state audition, I think it's a good idea to spend some time really familiarizing yourself with the D flat major scale and some of the arpeggios that are going to figure in prominently in this particular etude. So I would work on a full range D flat major scale, try to take it all the way up to the high F, because as you can see, certainly in the arpeggio and then the scale coming down, making it up to the high F is going to be really, really helpful. So a D flat major scale is helpful to put into your practice routine. The D flat major arpeggio, also the A flat major arpeggio, that's the dominant chord in this key. The G flat major arpeggio shows up quite a bit in here. And then also for measures 34 through 37, working on your D fully diminished 7th chord arpeggio. If you don't know what I mean by a D fully diminished arpeggio, just look at those measures 34, 35, 36, and 37, and it's that collection of notes. And because it has both Ds and A flats, that's going to be a place where you will want to go ahead and use the forked F. I think in something of this speed and this technical nature, you're going to want to make sure that you develop a really good, resonant, beautiful tone in your forked F so that it can blend in as a fine substitute for your regular F and your left F in this etude. Which brings me to the other big point that we should really address as oboe players with this page 44 D flat major Fairling etude. Fingerings are going to really matter. I will figure out a way and try to send you a scan of, I've written out a nice clean page with all of the fingerings that I would suggest using. These are the fingerings that I use. They're not the only fingerings that would work, but for me, solving the puzzle, this is the best way that I can solve the puzzle for my own hands and my own technique. We have a lot of Fs in here, and it's really important that we use both the best sounding but also the most efficient fingerings, because we want to be able to keep this one moving. So keeping the difference between the regular or right hand Fs, the left Fs, both of those sound better, but then the forked Fs are going to really be necessary for getting to and from all of the left E flats and the A flats that are going to be required in a key like D flat major. The high F fingering here, I know there are probably plenty of oboists who would use this as an opportunity to explore some short fingerings or some abbreviated fingerings up there. But for me, I'm always challenging myself to try to work out as much technique up in the 3rd octave using the full long fingerings. So I actually use a long F fingering here on the right side. I'd encourage you to check out a really, really good fingering chart like the Martin Schuring fingering chart that can help you find those great fingerings. But I do use the full long F fingering on the right side so that I can come back down on the E flat and have my left hand pinky key ready to go for the E flat as well. There are a couple of other really specific fingering challenges that we run into in this page 44, and it's really because we're in a key that already comes with a boatload of flats, the 5 flats in the key signature. Measure 28, if you can find measure 28, here we have a D flat, a low D flat, followed by a low C, followed by a low D flat. For this, some people might want to use this Some people call it the gilet key or the banana key because it looks kind of like a banana. You could finger the low C like that and then just go D flat, C, D flat. That's always a little tricky for me. I use this gilet key sometimes for trills and things like that, but I have to really be accurate to make sure that I cover that hole in the middle of that key and grab that key at the same time, which can be a little bit tricky for me, especially coming in after the rest. So what I actually do, I just do kind of a rock back and forth. And whenever I'm rocking back and forth between the low C key and the D flat key, I try to play the low C key with a crease in my pinky so that instead of sliding, I can really just rock back and forth. And there's nothing wrong with pressing both the D flat and the C key together at the same time when you're trying to play D flat, because in fact, if you turn the oboe over and you look at the key, you're going to see that that's exactly what your oboe does for you. So when I play the D flat here, I feel myself take both of those keys with the pinky, and then I just rock back off of the D flat key and then back onto it to go between those two notes. So that's how I solve the problem in measure 28 of going back and forth between the D flat and the C. There's another really tricky riddle that we have to solve in measure 55. So if you look down, that's the last measure of the second to last line. The last three notes, we have an E natural, followed by an F natural, followed by an E flat, which is followed by a D flat, so that has to be a left E flat. Because we're on a left E flat, or we need to get to a left E flat, I would usually start looking for a forked F. But I'm getting to that F from an E natural, which means that I really want to use not a forked F, either a regular F or a left F. So something's got to give here. For me, my best solution, I really don't like trying to switch from an E natural to a forked F. I get too much of a blip there. It's easier for me. I actually take E natural, then I play a left F, and then I will slide my pinky to grab the left E flat as well. It takes a little bit of coordination and a bit of practice, but for me, that's the best technical solution that I have, and I think it can come across pretty convincingly. Stylistic considerations. I think it can be pretty intimidating to see 3/4 marked as being in 1. We really get the idea that it needs to be fast, but I want you to focus on the poco allegretto. I think the words are always more important than any numbers that you see on the page. Poco allegretto, and the 3/4-ness of this reminds me that this is really a dance. It's kind of a fast waltz, a quick waltz. Let's use the word quick instead of fast so that we're not under any kind of frantic pressure here, because we really want to keep this light and moving and elegant. Elegant is a word that I would love to be able to say describes our performance of this, even though it's challenging. So if I focus more on the dance nature and making sure that I'm emphasizing maybe downbeats and not so much the inside beats, that gives me this sense of being in 1 without being quite so frenzied. Speaking of that, the tempo, the speed, and everything, I think it's a good idea to go ahead and learn this slowly in 3 and then speed it up and get that sense of 1. So as you're playing it in 3, even using the metronome to work that up, just make sure that you're not overemphasizing beats 2 and 3 so that as you speed it up and move it into 1, you keep that lilt and that feeling of a waltz. Now, I think there are 2 sequenced passages. Sequence meaning we take one kind of melodic motive or pattern and it moves up or it moves down. There are 2 of these passages that I think warrant extra special practice because, well, at least for me, they're a little bit tricky. The first is measures 20 through about measure 27. There are lots of alternate fingerings to keep track of, and sometimes I'm using one alternate, and then right after that in the next sequence, I need to use another alternate fingering or another fingering combination to get through that. So I think that's a really good passage to kind of highlight and pull out. And the other one is measure 54 through 58. This is not just a sequence, it's also a sequence with hemiola. He's taking a rhythmic pattern out of 2/4 and plugging it into 3/4, which gives us this sense of excitement and frenzy. But don't you get swept up in the excitement. Stay in control here. And notice that this is also where we have to do kind of that fancy slide from the left F to the left E flat to the D flat. So we have lots of complicated things going on here. So this is a section that takes extra special attention. A word of advice: don't put off working on the passages up to the high F. You get to play it twice in the etude, once at the beginning and once at the end. So you might as well learn it really well, and then enjoy it both times. But one last word of advice here. This is an etude that I would learn backwards. Something like this, there are so many alternate fingerings for me to keep track of. There are so many things happening in quick succession. There are those sequences we talked about. I want to know the end better than I know the beginning, so that as I get mentally a little bit tired and I've got a lot of work to do, by the time I get to the end, I'm actually getting to the sections that I know the best and I'm best prepared at. So I would suggest that you first start by learning measures 46 to the end. You'll get to work on that one really special sequence at the end. Plus, you'll also get to work through that passage up to the high F, and it'll pay off because you'll get to play it at the beginning. So I would start with 46 to the end, and then I would work on 34 to the end, 16 to the end, and then I would start at the beginning and work to the end as well. Don't forget, break this into small pieces. This is not an etude that I would expect to learn in a day or even a week, especially some of those trickier things going up to the high F, some of those sequences that are particularly challenging, and some of this pinky work that you're going to have to do. This is one that you're going to want to really take your time and learn a little bit at a time every day. Reinforce the things that you do every day, and then you can really enjoy waltzing along in D flat major.